Right. So what we wanted to talk about today is a subject that you have written about, become interested in recently, and that's always a good jumping off point for us.
Uh-huh.
And what it is it's a new personality system,
Hmm.
or personality schema.
Yeah, at least new to me anyway.
Yeah, yeah, and new to me too. Although I've heard about it.
Hmm.
And what is it called? The Big Five?
Well, now it's called the HEXACO system. That's six. Before that, the Big Five was a personality system that gained a lot of prominence in the 70s and 80s and since, because it was the only personality system that wasn't based in a theory.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Freudian theory, MMPI, Rorschach, Jungian theory, Myers-Briggs, the Enneads and Gurdjieff, Enneagram. But this was a bunch of geek scientists got together and gave thousands of people hundreds of adjectives to describe themselves and other people. And then they did, with the computers of the 70s, they did factor analysis, and they found 5 continua, which are 5 factors, that explained everything to them. Okay, which scientists love stuff like that. I mean, personality theorists just go, that's a wet dream for personality theorists. So it had those 5 characteristics, and everybody thought, okay, and they did other studies in different countries. And those 5 characteristics were introversion, extraversion. They're all continua, extroversion, introversion. One of them was called neuroticism, which meant you were emotionally sensitive and empathic, or you weren't. Another one was openness to new experience, or close to experience. Another one was agreeableness, or not being agreeable. And the other one was conscientiousness. So in the 90s, these 2 graduate students at the time, Kibeom Lee and Michael Ashton, they said, well, let's just try some country in the East. So obvious Kibeom Lee is of Korean extraction, I guess. So they went to Korea and got a whole bunch of students and did this thing. And then when they were doing their data analysis with modern computers in the 90s, they said, well, let's test for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 variables, factors. Why not? And then the computer sped out the results, and it wasn't 7 or 8 or 9, it was 6. There was a 6th variable. And whoa. For a couple of graduate student personality researchers, they're looking at the rest of their lives if they see this. Okay?
Okay, yeah.
Because, all right, we just discovered this, and now in our field, we're the founders of this thing, and they've been researching it for the last 25 years. And that extra dimension was honesty, humility. That people high on honesty, humility cared about others. They were egalitarian to the extent I don't want special stuff. They told the truth. It bothered them when they didn't tell the truth. They didn't feel a particular drive to lord over other people or have higher status. They wanted status that felt right within their group, and they wanted other people to have equal opportunity for status. That's high honesty, humility. Low honesty, humility people said, I will do whatever it takes for me to get ahead, and I will exploit other people to do it. I'm special. And not only do I deserve special treatment, but people of my group deserve special treatment. So there's some things about this that are amazing to me.
Well, before we get into further, let me just sort of nail it down for myself.
Sure.
So of the original 5, so extraversion, introversion, I think we all know that when that comes through in Myers-Briggs, that comes through in the Enneagram in various ways. And maybe just even to put a bigger palette or canvas here, when we talk about personality typologies, we're talking about, sort of certainly firmware in us.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe not quite hardware, but firmware that we are born into it. Maybe it's our karmic stream. It might just be an accident of, you know, how brains are wired. But at any rate, we come in with certain predispositions. And of course, typologies is one of the 5 elements of the aqua map of Ken Wilber's aqua theory. And, you know, so this is a real foundational thing of how we would describe ourselves and
Yes.
and other people, and what are the makeup. And so anyway, so we have this extroversion, introversion that shows up in a lot of places. Empathetic and non-empathetic, that would be, if I think of Myers-Briggs, I would think of the difference between a feeler and a sensor.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody's more concerned with getting the job done and not so concerned about people's feelings, the other side of the continuum is you're really just tuned in to other people's feelings, and for you want everybody to be happy.
Yes.
Right. So that's
right.
So then there's openness and not openness. That feels a little new to me from the other typologies in a certain way. And, you know, of course I think most of us would default to openness being better, but what's the upside of not openness?
Well, now, first of all, I love you going through it. It's openness to new experience and openness to receiving influence and changing your perspective. Okay. And then if you're low on openness, you want to stay with what you know. You're not open to new experience. You want to, it's more conventional. And you know, you can't be an integral and not see the value memes coming through this. Yeah. Now, and so people that are low in openness to new experience can have the same virtues that any conformist group can have. Mm-hmm. They can, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about social dominance orientation later on. They can have the same understanding that we have values that are more important than other things, and we share these values and they're important to us and we don't want to change them. And you can give me data about that, but I'm not going to change my beliefs because my beliefs are important to me. Mm-hmm. In other words, and the other thing about emotional intelligence is that you're more generous emotionally. The HEXACO, they call it HEXACO system, those 6 factors. They don't call it neuroticism, they call it emotionality, which I think is a less pejorative term. Mm-hmm. And if you're high in it, you're also more generous. You know, you want to give, particularly to people that you know. Mm-hmm. So,
okay. All right. So that would be the openness, and there's a benefit to not open if you're really in some ideology, or you know, if you don't really want to dilute this sort of passion you might have, or something.
Say your great example for me was the head of Shotokan Karate, Susomi Oshima. You know, he taught Shotokan Karate. Now, it didn't really matter if there was data that showed that some of those techniques were not good for your body or were less effective.
It's a very good example.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's Shotokan.
Work in the system.
There was a purity about it to him that I still, to this day, admire. You look at a Zen Roshi and head of his temple.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
You know, I don't particularly find Zazen to be my favorite spiritual practice. I do meditation, doing things that Zen Roshis would disapprove of, like when I'm swimming or walking or that kind of stuff.
Right. Okay? Yeah. I got it. You know, in some ways, you're keeping the faith. You're keeping the orthodoxy. If
you're a healthy version.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a healthy version. Yeah, I'm trying to find the healthy version too. I think when we get to honesty and humility, they're probably going to have a hard time.
That's exactly right.
And that's interesting. But let's go through the original 5. So we have the extroversion, we have the empathy, we have the openness, we have agreeable. So agreeable and disagreeable. And this is good for me, Keith, because it normalizes the fact that some people are just fucking disagreeable.
They so are.
And, you know, maybe they just get to be, and I don't have to have a big charge about it.
Well, first of all, it's a liability socially.
Yeah, they're definitely paying the price.
It's funny when they were writing the book, they said people that are low on honesty and emotionality and agreeableness are just plain nasty. You know?
Yeah.
It was like, I thought, God, it's nice to hear researchers use terms like that. Yeah, you're litigious
Yeah.
You find other people irritating or offensive.
Yeah.
You're quick to criticize others, and you're hypersensitive to criticism to you. You're low on agreeability.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now there could be a healthy version. Now, you're really high on agreeableness, obviously.
I am high on agreeableness, I will say. And there's a downside to that too, but we're not going to get hung up here. Some of this stuff is obvious here.
Well, healthy and unhealthy on each end.
Thank you. There you
except
this last one. But before we get to that, so extraversion, empathy, openness, agreeableness, and then the last one's conscientiousness.
Yeah.
Which some people are just not very conscientious.
Impulsive. Don't stick to finish something. Hard for them to make a commitment and then follow through on it. Now,
maybe a little ADD in there, maybe a little, maybe some creativity comes with that.
You can see that a healthy version of that is somebody that is just allowing themselves to flow with the inner rhythms. And particularly around creativity, those inner rhythms can lead you to novel places.
Yeah.
The thing that people don't realize about ADD is people with attention deficit disorder can stay concentrated for many hours on things that they like an art project or a video game or something like that. It's just that they have about a 20th of the tolerance of boredom that the rest of us have.
So when they're not bored, it's not a problem.
Yeah, if they're not bored, it's not a problem. If they're bored, bam, they disappear. They're gone.
Yeah.
And so that's, there you go. And conscientiousness, there was an interesting statistic. They said if you want a really good employee, you want somebody who's high on honesty and humility, high on conscientiousness. You can have a good employee who's low on honesty and humility and high on conscientiousness, but they'll leave in a minute if somebody gives them a better offer. And they might rip you off if they get a chance. Okay? But if they're smart, they won't, because you make a lot more money not ripping people off than ripping people off, so to speak. Okay?
Right. Yeah.
So that's conscientiousness.
Yeah, got it. Okay, cool. So there we have those first five: extraversion, empathy, openness, agreeableness, conscientiousness. And so now we go into this new factor that arose out of the data, in some magical way that the data does that. Yeah,
factor analysis.
I wouldn't understand it anyway. So anyway, it arises this new factor, and that is honesty/humility.
Yeah, and high on, as I said earlier, are these qualities: being honest, and low on honesty, humility, being more arrogant and entitled. And as far as I can tell, this is a discriminative variable, because I can only think of one healthy version of low honesty, humility. And that's if you're in a war and you want somebody to go and destroy the enemy without thought to the cost to your soldiers or them. You want somebody that's really low on honesty, humility, high on conscientiousness. Okay.
Yeah.
And we had people like that. The guy who ran the bombing campaign on Japan.
Yeah.
Okay, that guy killed hundreds of thousands of Japanese, and they probably didn't care that much about it. He was very low on this quality, but very high on conscientiousness.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of any other place for that, but given that all these have arisen from our tribal roots, you can see that it's useful in a tribe to have somebody that is willing to do extreme things to give themselves an advantage or to exploit or manipulate other people, just in case the group, the family, the kinship group, which our tribes are, is encountering some threat. You want somebody who doesn't have scruples and doesn't have empathy. You want them to deal with that. Why?
It's an ugly business.
It's an ugly business. My biggest problem as a martial artist was my empathic capacity, which is pretty large. And so the hardest thing for me to learn was to cut myself off empathically from another person when I was doing violent stuff with them. And so I think the reason why I'm saying this is all 6 of these have a normal distribution, which is kind of amazing. That means if you take a bunch of humans, there's going to be as many people below the norm on honesty, humility, as above the norm. And this is inherent. 2/3 of personality is inherent, is genetically programmed. 1/3 of it comes from random events and culture. And as far as the personality theorists have been able to discover through analysis of twin studies and fraternal twins and so on, and brothers and sisters, none of it comes from family. Which is, and this confused me until I realized psychopathology does. So psychopathology is another dimension. You have more or less psychopathology depending on how nurturing your family is and your experiences, more or less physical and psychological symptoms, not just, never mind psychopathology, but actually physical pathology. But you're the same personality having that experience.
Yeah.
And I think given the spiral dynamics principle of life conditions produces worldviews, I suspect that different kinds of life conditions tend to amplify some of these 6 traits, and certain life conditions tend to suppress them. For instance, if we were in East Germany circa 1955, it would tend to suppress honesty and humility. It would tend to suppress emotional sensitivity. It would tend to increase conscientiousness because the people that weren't paying a lot of attention got thrown in jail.
Yeah.
Because in East Germany, they had 900,000 citizens whose job was to inform on other citizens.
Yeah.
And so it was a culture that amplified paranoia as a survival technique. Whereas if you go to Boulder and hang out with Jeff, you being more conscientious and more friendly and more agreeable or more honest and humble will be rewarded by the culture, and you're surrounded by people like that. This is what Ken used to say, like a culture will suck you up, center of gravity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then that's going to amplify those traits and tamp down a little bit the egocentrism, perhaps, or the manipulativeness, perhaps.
So what are you seeing if as you look at the sort of leading edge of the culture, your clients, perhaps, to people and your friends, how does this inform that that sort of next stage of development? We're always talking about what's integral like,
and this is something that I've learned a half dozen times, and I keep learning it again. So I must be either forgetting about it or having a deeper understanding. There's something innocent about the idea that we have a personality, and what we need to do is be a healthy version of that personality rather than change. Okay?
Can we just pause there? That's really great. We have a personality, and the idea is to be the best of that personality possible instead of trying to change it. Yeah.
Because trying to change our basic nature leads to fundamental shame. I wish I had read these studies before I wrote my book, The Gift of Shame, because it would have been an added level of addressing the dynamic. Because we're so social, we learn to be ashamed of the parts of us that are either disapproved of by our family and culture, or in our own opinion, don't fit in with our family and culture. And particularly, we tend to, and there's some interesting research about this that maybe we can talk about another time more, but we tend to get our motivations, our goals, through mirroring. That what we want tends to be a reflection of what the culture says is valuable. So American culture of the 90s and 2000s said being rich and famous is great, because we're shifting into this individualistic thing out of
the modern, that's sort of part of the pathology of modernity.
Yeah. So how about if you're not wired particularly to want to be famous or to want to be rich past a certain point? I mean, happiness doesn't increase after about $120,000 a year. Okay, but what if I'm wired to think, well, I'll be a lot happier if I make 10 million? Okay, well, what's wrong with me? I made my 10 million. I'm not happy. If I get famous, I'll be a happy person. Well, wait a minute, I'm famous.
Yeah.
How come I'm not happy? Well, those values weren't generated intrinsically who I am coming out into the world. They were absorbed by some kind of mirroring process. I think probably the mirror neuron phenomena that is so popular in terms of knowing about interpersonal relationships and how we exchange moods and all that. I think that there are deeper levels of that we're going to keep discovering neurologically and psychosocially, on the lower left and the lower right quadrant.
Yeah.
And so we tend to get ashamed then if I'm doing what I'm supposed to do and I'm not feeling great, there must be something wrong with me. Now, if we fully embrace type, we go, okay, who am I? And what is it that I intrinsically yearn for? And when I get some of that, it makes me feel more complete and more good and more whole. When we've talked about sex, this is one of my favorite ways of seeing it because it's easier to see. It's pretty clear now that people don't decide as much what gets them off sexually as discover what gets them off sexually. Mm-hmm. Okay, so somebody discovers they get off on, I don't know, BDSM, okay, bondage, submission, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. All right, so rather than go, well, what's wrong with me? Because that doesn't fit with, say, my fundamentalist Christian culture or something, or being gay, in a fundamentalist Christian culture. You go, well, I guess that's who I am. What's a healthy expression of that? Okay. You look at the different turn-ons. There's the sexual turn-on, the energetic turn-on, the emotional turn-on, the kinky turn-on, the shapeshifter turn-on. Everybody has a number one and number two of turn-ons. This is another typology system. Okay, so that's my type. What's a healthy expression of that? And more importantly, what's that healthy expression of that with my lover? And how can my lover and I kind of work with our turn-ons? What this does is it begins to take the moral judgments that we instinctively make of people that don't value what we value or don't care about what we care about. It turns them into more from a moral judgment into curiosity. Yeah. Okay. Now, when we have curiosity about ourselves, curiosity about other people, we begin to do these psychological miracle transmutations, these philosopher's stone transmutations that are our human heritage, for instance, turning shame into regret. Okay? I work all day long regularly helping people turn shame into regret. I regret having done things that were not optimal things. But if I'm not feeling shame about it, I've shifted from that interior sense of I was bad and I get whatever bad people get to I didn't know then what I know now, and I made a mistake and I regret making that mistake. Okay? Which positions me in the present moment moving forward in a positive developmental arc.
Yeah, okay? Rather than stuck with that sort of magnetic pull of shame.
Yeah, and so typology, fully embracing typology systems gives us that, for instance, and everything's episodic, right? I look back at the times that I had low H, I was highly egocentric and entitled and, was willing to lie to somebody. I mean, back in when I was a hippie, it was completely moral to lie to institutions and to cops and to everybody. You were expected to, and you felt a little weird if you wanted to tell the truth. Okay. Yeah. So that culture kind of amplified, this is what boomeritis was. It amplified that narcissistic entitlement kind of thing. Yeah. And so people are more fluid in their teens with these characteristics anyway. You get more solid in your 20s and your 30s. Interestingly, there is evidence that political orientation is more a matter of personality type than it is around environment. So people in the United States in their teens were more likely to mirror their parents' political persuasion.
Mm-hmm.
But in their 20s, they start moving in a direction that's consistent with whether they are high on openness to experience or honesty, humility. And that's another part. I hope we get to that, because I found
that's what I wanted to ask in general is, of these various typologies, what is it about this one that's captured your interest? I think of myself with the Enneagram. I could just see through that lens so easily now. I've been doing it for years. Myers-Briggs too, to some degree. So what's captured your fancy here?
Well, first of all, honesty, humility is the discriminative variable, in that if you're low in honesty, humility, doesn't matter whether you're high or low at any of the other five, you're a problem.
Yeah.
Not only are you a problem, you're going to have bad experiences of some sort, and other people should stay away from you. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, that's weird. There's 6 factors. They all have a normal distribution
of good and bad.
Good and bad, except this one. Over on this side, and as a therapist, I want to find out what type of person they are and help them be a healthier version of that. When I'm working with people that are low in honesty and humility, the way that I appeal to them is enlightened self-interest. Okay? I remember one guy, really low on this. I said, okay, you want to be the man of wisdom. Okay, that appealed to him. Man of wisdom, yeah, that's me. That's a very special thing. I said, so if you're going to man of wisdom, you can't lie to your girlfriend or cheat on her, right? Because that's not being a man of wisdom. No, I guess not. Or scream or shout or hit her. I mean, he was anger management.
Yeah.
You're right. And so he went to his anger management group, which was filled with guys like him. And he introduced them to the idea of man of wisdom. And the man of wisdom really kind of caught their imagination in terms of, this is what we can use to not be such dicks when we're pissed. I want to be the man of wisdom. Okay. It was enlightened self-interest.
Neat. Yeah, that's great. Right.
Or one of my clients has an adult son who's obviously really low on honesty, humility. Now, those of us that have ever tried to help anybody know that there's certain people you can just talk to them all day and all night about, what's right and wrong, and things, blah, 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 blah. Almost any kid after 30 seconds, if they don't get it, then you're just tormenting them with your voice. I tell parents, shut the fuck up after a minute. If they get it in a minute, great. If they don't, let's do something else. Well, he has got this 29-year-old son who's obviously low on us, and unfortunately seems to be a little bit low on openness to experience, which is a little bit dangerous. And I said, all right, so with your son, stop lecturing him about what he needs to do, and set up a contingency so that he has to deliver certain kinds of successful behavior. If, he's got to look for a job.
Mm-hmm.
He's got to show you evidence that he's looked for a job. Why do I have to show you evidence, Dad? Well, because we both know that you'll lie to me about looking for a job if you have an opportunity, because that's what you've done. So I'm not saying this to say you evil young man. I say, look, we know that you lie to me if you get a chance. I don't want to give you a chance to lie to me, so show me the thing that you're looking for a job.
Rational response.
Yeah, and you want the check, like go look for the job. You want to stay in my house? Do this. Like set up a contingency so that he has to demonstrate success. Why? No matter what type of person you are, success is self-reinforcing. People that have relatively high intelligence, general intelligence, I'm talking about now, not emotional intelligence. There is a general G. If they're low on honesty and humility, but high in conscientiousness, they're hard workers. They generally don't do crime because in the United States, it's much easier to get great wealth by being a successful business person than it is by creating crime. Criminals, people that are high on the dark triad, Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy, they tend to be very low on conscientiousness, very impulsive. Mm-hmm. And they're very low, of course, on empathy. And they're very low on honesty, humility. And that's a dangerous comment. And generally, generally they tend to be below average in intelligence. And so
Somehow, with all of this, I feel like we're talking about Trump again.
oh, okay. Okay. I'm gonna anticipate. I'm gonna do a Trump thing. Okay. We're gonna get to this in just a second.
Okay. Good.
Okay. There's two other factors that Lee cross correlated that I found so fascinating that I wrote to you about them, and we'll talk about them: social dominance orientation and right wing authoritarianism, which are both personality characteristics. They called the lethal union was a social dominant oriented leader who's narcissistic, low on honesty, humility, will do anything to have power and status and wealth, and a right-wing authoritarian followers who obey established authority, follow conventional norms, and support aggression. They call that the lethal union. And that lethal union is what was the dominant force in our country for those 4 years.
Yeah.
And that's what produced, you look at any of the failed states, you look at any of the fascist states, and what you got is high social dominance orientation, which is really, really, really low honesty, humility, and then high right-wing authoritarianism, conventional standards, obey authority, aggression at people that don't conform and obey.
Yeah.
Bam.
Yeah.
Trump.
Yeah. No, for sure. And, and yet I want to add that we can bring development into that. I think that somebody like the personality of Trump, I mean, the fact that he's not more malignant, more violent, and more whatever, is that he's in a container that won't tolerate it.
That's right.
If you look back at 1920, Russia, or 1930 Germany, they didn't have the guardrails for this. And so that could run rampant in a way that, here it just still ran scarily rampant and still is, but not like that.
And that's a rising tide floats all boats.
Yeah.
In 1953 Russia, Stalin killed 20 million of his own. Now Trump would have killed people if he could have gotten away with it, but he didn't, because he was in a culture that didn't allow it.
Yeah.
In fact, Stephen Colbert did a parody about finding Banyan in contempt of Congress. That Banyan has to go through 6 different stages of evaluation of professionals before he goes to jail for up to a year. Okay?
Right.
He was making fun of that. And I was looking at that and I was thinking, that is a triumph of development.
A triumph of what?
Of development. That we have a culture that even when we really hate somebody and they're obviously guilty, there has to be 6 levels of people trying to do their job who've sworn an oath to the Constitution, who have to say, we'll move him to the next stage before he gets injured. Yeah. That we're so cautious.
Absolutely astonishing.
It is.
You weigh it with human history. It's an amazing achievement. And yet bureaucratic and kind of mindless and stupid in some ways. But, give me that over not that.
And I have a prediction to make about this. In most of the dystopia films, and also Keith, when Keith gets upset, they tend to say that there'll be an oligarchy of big corporations that'll oppress and extract from everybody, and everybody gets screwed except for the big corporations. Okay, but my prediction is that eventually this rising tide will create corporations that don't just have external constraints about having capital that is environmental capital and employee welfare capital and the general well capital. They won't just have external constraints around that. They'll have leaders on the inside that will have internal.
Absolutely. We're seeing that happening like crazy, really. When you think of the protests by the Netflix employees against Dave Chappelle's special.
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, the Facebook whistleblower. Mm-hmm. These companies have to keep their employees you know, they have the same moral sensibilities as the rest of the culture often, you know, even though the leader may be a narcissistic, you know, asshole, and often is.
I have a client who's a friend of Zuckerberg's. Known him for like 20 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Zuckerberg has been caught up by the wave of Facebook. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars to try to edit content. He's very interested in having Facebook and be a source of social enhancement rather than social degradation. When you know the studies that the whistleblower were talking about, the stuff that she was saying about Facebook, you could say the same thing about TV.
and they did. The social critics back then did.
And in
vast wasteland.
In Samoa, they didn't have teenage girls with eating disorders until they had TV. Yeah. 5 years later, they had the same amount of eating disorders as girls in Western society.
Yeah.
So TV was bad for teenage girls. Now, the solution to that can't be to ban TV for everybody in the world. Solution to that is we need to take this form just like the internal combustion engine. You know, we start with pollution, you know, and gas, and maybe what we end is hydrogen internal combustion, where the two side effects are water vapor and a little bit of excess heat, but no greenhouse gases. Okay, so when something like that happens, what it is a spur for further development. Of course, if you are high on social dominance orientation and you feel like something like Facebook is going to take wealth, power, or status from you, threaten you, then you are motivated to attack Facebook and say, well, the solution is to attack. Why? People high on social dominance orientation and or on right-wing authoritarianism are always for the current war, but for different reasons. The right-wing, the person who did this work was Bob Altemeyer, and the person who did the social dominance orientation was Felicia Prato and Jim Sedanis. People with right-wing authoritarianism, they want war at other people because the world's a dangerous place. And there's a lot of people out there that don't conform to conventional standards and don't obey our authorities. And so it's a good idea to attack them. Okay? Meanwhile, the social dominant orientation person says, yeah, there are people that want some of my status or wealth or power because it's a zero-sum game. And so I want to attack them to keep them down so I can stay up. They both like war, but they like it for different reasons. Okay? Yeah. Which is one of my biggest appreciation for Trump is that he didn't start a war.
Yeah.
That's the thing was completely uncharacteristic for that combination.
Yeah. 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 Well, the idea of leadership, even again, I always go back to stage theory, but if you think of pre-modern leadership in traditional and particularly warrior cultures, leadership was about domination.
Absolutely.
It's like, how could you get people to march in the direction you want them to march? And you got to kill this many people. You got to terrorize this many people. You got to incent this many people. But it's very cold and calculating. Mm-hmm. And that's functional at that stage of development. You know.
But now,
now we have to bring them along. Now we have to make them, want to do what we want them to do.
Well, also
manipulation.
Yes, but okay. So manipulation. So manipulation, if you're high on honesty and humility, looks like most of the management consultants that you and I know. Why is it that so many integral people went into consulting with companies? Okay, well, why was that so popular? Integral Coaching Canada is a good example. There's a lot of people I work with. Most of them know, if they don't know Integral, they know Keegan.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I mean, the simple answer is, and I don't mean this with any judgment, that's where the money is.
Yeah, exactly. Why is the money there? Because if you're a modern leader and you create an agile organization that has flex flow at whatever levels you can have it, and where you're not tied to the rigidity of convention, the rigidity of having to win rather than having to grow. For instance, a company that doesn't have a mission tends to dissolve, particularly if it has a founder. A company that has a mission, that has sight, and that tends to continue and grow. So if you want to make money, you need to be a leader that can create those kinds of groups. And again, this is enlightened self-interest, because out of 59 different professions, the one that had the most psychopathy and the most people that had high social dominance orientation was CEO. Okay, 59.
Yeah.
But if you just say, I know that creating an agile company means having these things happening, well, that's evolution now going into the very competitive marketplace of the corporation.
Yeah.
And the only time that's a problem is when there's a monopoly. Now, when you have a monopoly, you find things that are kind of amazing. In the biggest state in India, it's 230 million people. Okay, they wanted to help them out, and they couldn't get them vaccinated. I don't know if you've seen this study. I wrote down the name of the state because I can't remember Indian names to save my life, but it was Uttar Pradesh. Okay, so here's what they did. They gave everybody, 230 million people, a box. In the box was a COVID testing set, 4 or 5 remedies that are really effective in the early stages of COVID, a pulse oximeter, a temperature, alcohol wipes, and some masks. Okay, all that stuff in that box costs less than $3. Okay, in India. All that stuff in a box in the United States costs about $1,000.
Yeah.
If you can get that stuff. Oh, they also had doxycycline in it. Okay. So they gave that to every single person, 230 million people. Their rate of COVID went down 97.1%. Okay. Why? They got a cold. They did their thing. They put on a mask and did social withdrawal. They did all this stuff that's effective in the early stages. And their COVID went down. They haven't had any deaths in that province in the last couple of weeks. Okay.
Wow. Well, there's a lesson in there somewhere.
Under $3. It makes me want to go to India and say, hey, look, sell me 1 million of those things. I'll come to the United States. I'll sell them for $10 a piece.
Yeah.
Undercut the American pharmaceutical company by 10,000%. Make Keith $1 million. Of course, I could never do that.
Well, just as a little thought experiment, you actually could. So we're talking about a thermometer. We're talking about this. We're talking about that. We're talking about that pill, a mask. You put it in a nice little box with your picture on it, and Dr. Keith's COVID.
There you go. So and so to me, the fact that happened, that was done in India, and that I found out about it. At first that study was suppressed, and they couldn't suppress it anymore. They wouldn't. They had to. What was in the box finally had to come out. Yeah.
Well, you put a couple million, 100 million of them out there. It's hard to keep the secret.
240 million.
Yeah.
So to me, that's an example of, okay, so in the future, there is going to be people leading corporations. They go, yeah, let's make a lot of money and let's do what's best for our employees and best for the people and all that stuff.
No.
Be intrinsic.
Yeah.
That's
I saw another example of that. I actually did a little show on it today. It was a op-ed in the New York Times and I thought it was significant because it was arguing for abortion to be legal in the first trimester and pretty much illegal, or harder, very, very hard, but moving the bar towards the first trimester, which currently is it's the second, basically, and he explained that, Roe v. Wade. And part of the article, it was a guest column. Part of it was describing how de facto, this is really what's happening anyway.
That's right.
Because people feel that way. And here's the thing, we were talking about how, so these organizations, they have to deal with the rising consciousness of their, employees. Is that abortion providers don't want to provide abortions after the first trimester.
They don't.
It's too unpleasant.
And it's interesting to me that at least if you look at the statistics, if you don't have a miscarriage the first trimester, probably the pregnancy is kind of set. In other words, the woman's body has said, yes, I'm going to have a pregnancy.
Good point. Yes, that's another piece of the puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah, and so now we're talking about, okay, if psychologically you're not ready to have a child, then, and you determine that in the first trimester, all right.
Yeah.
And the first trimester is enough time to miss a period or two.
Yep.
And go, okay,
yep.
And have to have a little bit of so people cannot get burst out of denial and so on. I like it that it's more difficult after the first trimester. Why? There's more psychological investment. There's more psychological damage to the woman. Now,
no, it's just what you were saying, that, things get stabilized and it's like the die is cast after the first 3 months, psychologically, physiologically, for the baby itself. And that's interesting.
And there's no data whatsoever on any kind of post-abortion syndrome in women. Zero. Now, I've talked to women.
No data or no?
Well, no. There's no data supporting that there's a syndrome of women feeling bad about themselves or having trauma from having an abortion.
Right.
That what the data shows is women that have abortions feel fine about it afterwards. If they regret it, but not with a sense of shame.
That's what we're talking about.
They regret it later because when they're 35 and they remember they're having trouble getting pregnant, they remember their abortion at 23 and they go, God, I'd have a baby if I.
Yeah.
But that's a function of their development through the different lifestyles, because I didn't want to have any children at 23, and at 33 I was desperate to have children.
Is that right?
Yeah, I dreamt about them.
Really?
Oh God.
Yeah.
After I decided to get married, Becky and I got married in the 11th or 12th year of our relationship. Then I just started desperately wanting children. And I mean, talk about it. Doesn't just happen to women.
And then you had them.
Yeah, I had them.
Yeah, so that's all good.
I was very happy.
I think of my poor mom and dad. They had 2 by the time she was 20 and he was 23.
Oh my God.
And they did all right.
They did all right.
They did okay.
I think about that. It makes me more forgiving of my mother when she, was hostile or aggressive or scary when I was 4 or 5 or 6. She was 29.
Yeah.
She was a baby.
Yeah.
Jesus.
I know, and that's something.
So,
we talk about the evolution of culture, this evolution of the 20s as a life stage where you're not completely responsible for yourself like you used to be,
There's a great book by Meg Jay called The Defining Decade on the 20s. And particularly in this era where we have extended adolescence, really into the late 20s for upper middle class people, especially middle class people. The point that she makes and supports is very much that you're really setting yourself up socially, professionally, physically, and so on. Now, this brings us back to these 6 factors.
Yeah.
Right? So part of the modern age is that, at least in the United States now, everybody can basically be themselves. They're really, unless you're robbing liquor stores, you kind of get to be who you are. Even when you're applying for jobs, you can go apply for jobs and have tattoos up and down one side of your face, and if you're an adequate candidate for that job, they're going to hire you. I mean, this is just unheard of historically.
Yeah.
But what does that mean? That means that we do not have cultures around us saying, "Oh, we approve of exactly who you are," because a lot of people just feel basically unique. Okay? That lack of external approval really amplifies interior shame dynamics, because people walk around knowing that there's groups of people that I care about that really don't approve of or agree with something that I am, that I've discovered. Okay.
Right.
And so there's a lot more pressure on us to have radical acceptance of ourselves. That radical acceptance means we're less likely to put dissociative barriers between us and parts of us that need attention. And so to go, wow, I'm pretty low on conscientiousness and honesty, humility. I probably should put some work into that, or I'm going to have a lot of problems.
Yeah.
And let me see, since I'm low on conscientiousness, maybe I can get somebody to help me.
Yeah.
Good example of this. Conscientiousness tends to go up in your 20s. There was someone I was working with who has a kid who has very little conscientiousness. So this kid has, and kind of low on honesty, humility too, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But he's a good kid. He's high on agreeableness, okay? He's high, you know, he's high on openness to experience even.
Yeah.
So this happened to me 2 or 3 times. So I said, if you can afford it, get somebody to sit down with him a couple hours a day, 5 days a week, to just be with him doing homework. You know, an ADD person, if there's a person around that lowers that threshold of distress and they can do homework because they're doing it with somebody else. So I remember telling one couple to do this, suggesting this with their kid, and so the kid kind of had that for 5 into college. There was still somebody doing this, right? But at a particular point, something caught fire in this kid's heart, and then all of a sudden, bam, he's studying pre-med, and
That's something.
Yeah, like, so what you want to do is
it kicked in. The conscientiousness kicked in.
Why you provided? Okay, you provided the external support where you're weak.
Okay.
Until there's some part of the magic of development causes us to want to keep self-transcending, because self-transcendence is a characteristic, a temperamental character born with too. And at some point, that instinct to self-transcend combines with something that feels meaningful, like the 5th star or my 5-star thing, you know, something that feels sacred to me. Some kind of alchemy happens and I'm launched into something bigger than me.
Yeah.
Okay? So many people get stuck or killed or lost in stuff before that, addiction or some dead-end job or something.
Yeah, or like, to use this kid as an example, if he hadn't gotten support.
If he hadn't gotten that support.
Never really got on track, you know, and that's his life.
So he never would have had a platform where he could step into pre-med, because he wouldn't have passed Algebra 1. Yeah. But he was, and so there's always, with typology, there's always the ontological evolutionary aspect of it that's driven off of the evolutionary instinct, this instinct for self-transcendence that everybody has to some extent. The thing about honesty, humility, though, that is still, it still buzzes in me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, these guys wrote a whole book on this.
Yeah, called the H Factor.
To say about it.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
Look, here's another fun thing. Okay. So they went, and they made the point. If you're low on honesty, humility, this is what happens if you're low on emotionality and low on agreeableness. You're a Spanish conquistador type. Okay. I can go out and wreck every culture so I can get a few bucks. Okay. Yeah. Kennedy was actually low on honesty, humility, but he was high on agreeableness and high on openness to experience.
JFK,
yeah. Yep. JFK. The person who was highest on openness to experience and highest on honesty, humility, Gerald Ford.
Really?
Gerald Ford had a reputation, one person to serve with him in Congress 20 years. So I never knew him to lie. And he was humble enough that when his dog pooped on that White House carpet, he insisted on cleaning it up himself. Oh. Gerald Ford.
Yeah. Okay. No, good guy for sure.
Good guy. Okay, so now JFK was one of our greatest presidents. Okay, so it doesn't mean that you can't contribute, but you know,
absolutely. Yeah.
So
I think even just using some of what we were talking about. I mean, it's functional for a tyrant to be tyrannical. And
That's right,
in
good
the
point.
age of red empire culture, that's sort of, I guess it's what you need, and then there's sort of a more humane, more complex version of that in the sort of psychopathic CEO.
That's right.
I
That's
mean,
exactly right.
in some ways, you need that person who doesn't feel, a lot of shame, doesn't feel a lot of, feels
No
not a lot of
empathy.
humility.
Not a lot of humility or empathy.
Yeah, and sees that people can be moved by truth, lies, whatever it takes.
There was a great scene in The Big Short where this young guy who'd been making like $300,000 or $400,000 a year doing his thing, sitting down in the bathroom, washing his hands with the CEO. And the guy's saying, God, this pretty much wrecks my life, this whole thing. And the CEO's looking at him going, yeah? And it's like, so what?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not wrecking.
What do you want from me?
Yeah, what do you want from me? It's not wrecking. It's not wrecking my life.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's and there'll be another version, more humane, more complex version of that to come. I mean, I think we're probably seeing it.
I think we're seeing it.
Yeah, with leaders who are, more collaborative. They just have a bigger sort of view, more capacity for some of these other things. I mean, I don't know. I'm sort of making it up as I go along here, but
I've seen that.
How do you see it?
Well, I've seen that. Well, now there's, my sample is skewed. It's people who seek out Keith, so people low on honesty. The way our low honesty or our low open a new experience ends up in my office is a husband or wife drags them in.
Right, exactly.
Or they've had such a devastating experience that they want somebody to help them metabolize a devastating experience. But that being said, the quality of the leaders, of the chief COOs, CEOs, chief technology officers, and so on, and the psychological sophistication of their management techniques, of some of them, is very impressive to me. And also, I've mentioned this before when we've talked about it. I see what happens to organizations if they allow a poor middle manager in. Mm-hmm. It's like fruit of the poison tree. All the good people under that poor management start leaving.
Yeah.
And that manager might have short-term gains. They might make more money and look better for a few years. But basically, the psychological infrastructure, particularly if it's a service organization, is gutted.
Yeah.
And I think more and more organizations are understanding that. And here's the thing: if you really do want a high honesty, humility, high extraversion, and high agreeableness, and high open to experience in a manager, high emotional level. Now, added on to that, if you're an agreeable person, we talked about this earlier. If you don't have a capacity to set boundaries, you become codependent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's not so good.
Codependence actually amplifies pathology.
Yeah.
And so the ability to say no, the ability to do something that creates injury if it's the right thing, you can do it kindly or compassionately, is very much like a permissive parent versus an authoritative parent. An authoritative parent will set boundaries if necessary, but they'll do it in a matter-of-fact fashion without particular shame stuff. And they'll have a developmental orientation from the very beginning with kids. Right. If you have a permissive parent, then what it does is creates narcissism. And then by the time the kid is an entitled 6 or 7 or 8-year-old, particularly if they pass that 8-year-old, it's a critical period where your personality kind of settles in. That's going to be dealing with
narcissistic. You say that and I think, thank God I didn't have kids. My dogs are little narcissists. I mean, permissive is the word.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
I was a pretty good parent. I was a great parent, and there's a lot of stuff that I would have done differently.
Really?
I remember my daughter saying once, she says, "Yeah, Daddy, I have daddy issues." I went, "Great." You know, like I thought I could be such a good daddy when I have issues. I have daddy issues. Well, just tell me how I can help, right?
Yes, exactly.
Which goes back to this thing about if we're going to be our own person, then our capacity for knowing ourselves and accepting ourselves needs to be proportionally higher than previous generations, which and are integral, right?
Yes.
What's integral all about? Felt appreciation from multiple points of view.
Yes.
A flex flow power dynamic depending upon what demands of the situation, a radically diminished fear of death and of change.
Yes.
It in a way, the current culture is requiring of us to be more evolved, to be more functional and more healthy or happy.
And we're doing it. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, I do too. And we're helping people all along, and as well as ourselves, Keith. All right. So the book is again the H
Factor by Kibeom, Lee, and Michael Ashton. The personality system is they call it HEXACO. You know, beginning with humility, ending with openness to experience. By the way, we choose our friends with people that we think are like us on honesty, humility, and like us on openness to experience. Mm-hmm. And the very interesting thing about that is that our accuracy with our friends is mildly positive. We're about 0.25 correlation, which is pretty high. Mm-hmm. Our accuracy, but when you actually what we think, we tend to think our friends are more like us than they are. We tend to think our friends are like us to about a 0.4, but they're actually like us to about a 2.5. But we choose people that are like us. We don't mind if people are different from us on conscientiousness or extraversion and that stuff. But we pick, and we don't just pick friends that we think are like us on honesty, humility, openness to experience. We pick lovers that are like us. And not only that, that persists, whether we divorce or not. When people they chose people that they thought were similar levels. Those two seem to be very important to humans when it comes to affiliating.
Interesting. Say them again, those two. Honesty and openness to new experience.
Openness to new experience, wanting to try new things, wanting to change your opinion when given new data. Honesty or wanting to do it the way that it's always been done, not wanting to receive new experience, not open to new ideas. Honesty, humility, high on being honest, high on being humble, low, more egocentric, more in it for me, more not liking things like welfare or minorities, people that are high on social dominance, high on right-wing authoritarianism. They don't like minorities, they don't like welfare, that kind of stuff.
Well, that explains why authoritarians tend to like each other.
They like each other, yeah. Trump and what's his name, in North Korea.
Yeah, I know, little Rocket Man.
Yeah, Rocket Man. They go like, well, and so the part of it that is most interesting to me was that part that I mentioned earlier. We discover our type and want to become a healthier version. And if I simultaneously discover that I'm low on H, wow, I'm pretty egocentric and feel pretty entitled. But I actually want to be a more caring person. The miracle of development, and the miracle of the lower left of intersubjectivity, is that I can grow and become, and actually, depending on what my enneatype is, because you can have any of these with any enneatype, okay? I become a healthier and healthier version of myself being more egocentric. Partly because I learned to care more, and partly because I realized that it works to everybody, including me.
Yes. Yes. I've known some people who have done that. They're much better people in their older age. Yeah. No doubt about it.
So that's inspiring. That's helpful.
Yeah, I like it.
The whole thing about personality being 2/3 genetic and 1/3 the world, as demonstrated by twin studies. That's very useful, particularly when parents have adopted kids that are having a lot of difficulty. You know, it makes sense if 2/3 of personality is inherited. Your parents have, your biological parents have some understanding of what it's like to be you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay? Because they probably share a lot of your traits.
Yeah.
I can see how that would be more difficult with adopted kids.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We just get a more complex understanding of things as we go.
Which helps us, again, going back to have a felt appreciation of multiple points of view. It helps move us towards those second tier moments of wider understanding and then looking for the action that serves the highest good.
Yeah. Yeah. Hallelujah. I like that part. All right. Well,
I think we've done it again.
Yes, we did it again. So again, the book is The H Factor, and it's the personality types. And did you write an article about it, or is there something that
I published a blog in it? You can go to my website and get the blog, or sign up for my website. You know, if you sign up for my website, you will get a video of something that I think is so very cool for the next 12 weeks and doesn't cost anything. And you have access to all kinds of material on my website. And there's all kinds of other things, videos, lots of Trinket pundits on my website.
Yeah, right on.
And so, you know, drkeithwitt.com.
Keithwitt.com. All right. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of The Shrink and the Pundit with me and Dr. Keith Witt. And we'll see you next time.
Much love to everybody.
Much love.